Christopher Nolan has a new movie in theaters right now, and that means that there are now 13 movies in his filmography, and it's time to rank them. I don't think it's much of a debate that Christopher Nolan is the defining director of this century, and he's truly never made anything close to a bad movie, so ranking these is going to be particularly difficult. Make sure to leave your own ranking down below, and let's jump straight into it. In last place, I have Following, Nolan's first movie. I don't really have much to say about it. It's very low budget, it's probably his weakest story, and since there's no real budget, we don't get to really see the iconic grand imagery that makes him the filmmaker that he is. That's not to say that you can't still feel Nolan at the heart of this film, because I think you actually can. Even though I don't love the story, it's still a tight script that is paced pretty well, so there are flashes of future greatness and talent behind the camera, but naturally, nothing about this is as refined as later works. At number 12, I have Insomnia. I've never really met anyone that doesn't have these two movies in their last two spots, and that's because this film is kind of the black sheep of Nolan's catalog. It's very much the kind of movie that you could slap 500 different directors' names on, and I wouldn't bat an eye. It's much more of a defined genre film than anything Nolan has made since. He doesn't really try to push the limits of that crime thriller genre, and what we're left with is a really good but not great crime thriller that lacks any sort of memorability or staying power. I really like Al Pacino in this role, and Hilary Swank is good as well, but I don't know why I never really bought Robin Williams as his character. I don't really have a whole lot more to say about this one because when we're talking about Nolan, this is the other film, aside from Following, where we can't really talk about him as much as we can the script he was given or the genre the film just fit comfortably into. Still a good movie that I did enjoy, but it looks like an ant compared to the giants later on. Coming in at number 11, I've got Dunkirk. I think the only reason I have this low is not because of any inherent issues with the film, it just feels like it's lacking the sort of grand scale and ambition we get later on in this list. It's still a very good war movie, and it's still taking on the task of telling 3 different stories at the same time, and that is a huge challenge to undertake. But with a runtime of only about an hour and 45 minutes and only a few sequences that really stuck with me, I think this kind of feels like one of the lighter movies that Nolan would have made in one of the years between Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, or that and The Dark Knight Rises. But no, this movie came 3 years after Interstellar, and Nolan didn't release another film until 3 years later, so Dunkirk is kind of forced to stand on a pedestal, which I just don't think it's quite good enough for. That being said, I think the cast here is great. We don't spend a whole lot of time with any one of them, but the little chunks we get with Tom Hardy and Cillian Murphy and Kenneth Branagh and Mark Rylance, they all make for engaging pockets of the film that make the runtime fly by. Overall, it's a very strong movie that just lacks a little bit of that oomph that a lot of these have. Moving into the top 10, I have Tenet. Despite its placement on this list, I still am higher on it than most people. I find it so stimulating for the brain, both in the sense that it's hard to even believe the action sequences I'm watching, but also because I kinda don't get everything that's going on. But I feel like that's a pretty universal experience for everyone. That being said, on that note, it does get a little bit complicated for its own good. There's an opportunity here to cut down a little bit on the amount of things going on and really flesh out the main storyline, and I think that probably would have made for a better film. But that being said, I do think the story here is still really engaging and well written. Also, the action, as I mentioned earlier, is unbelievable to watch, even to this day. I have no clue how you manage to choreograph a fight backwards, and the fact that Nolan crashed a real plane into a real building still doesn't feel like something that can possibly happen. I just love the vibe of this movie overall. I love Ludwig Göransson's score, and it's one that even though it isn't very rewatchable at all, I still have a fun time whenever I see it. Next up, I have Batman Begins. This is the most defined origin movie we've ever gotten for my favorite superhero of all time, so that automatically makes me love it a bit more, but we're also just dealing with a really great film overall. It's our first introduction to Christian Bale as Batman, which I kind of think gets lost in the mix of the best comic book castings ever. And then the side characters here, what make the Nolan Batman trilogy so strong in my opinion. This world feels so alive because every character is so distinct. In this film you get Gary Oldman as Gordon and Michael Caine as Alfred, and then of course Liam Neeson and Cillian Murphy as your villains. Neither of them are the most sinister or intimidating antagonists of all time, but they do their job really well, and both work as proper villains in this slightly more grounded version of Gotham. I also enjoyed Katie Holmes as Rachel, and no disrespect to The Dark Knight or Maggie Gyllenhaal, but Holmes is just so much better. The only problem I have with this is that I'm not absolutely head over heels in love with the first 45 minutes with the League of Shadows stuff. Sure, it's really cool, but growing up, I was never really into comics, and that's a me thing, not a criticism of the film, but I could never get that into Bruce Wayne fighting with ninjas or training with a bunch of assassins. But altogether, this is a very strong origin film for Batman, and it set the stage for one of the best film trilogies ever made. At 8, I have The Prestige. I hear a bunch of people say this is their least favorite of Nolan's bigger blockbuster films. I hear some people say it's in their top 3. I always felt sort of in the middle between those two camps. I think this is a very strong story that's compelling in a way that some of Nolan's other films aren't. This rivalry between magicians is a really cool and creative concept that is explored in a very engaging way, and I think it's probably the most Nolan has ever interacted and played with the audience. It's the only one of his films with a big twist, and the way he sets that up and then essentially taunts you for not guessing it, because you probably didn't, adds an extra layer to the film that wouldn't have been there otherwise. As for the performances, it's another great outing for Christian Bale, but man, do I wish that we could get more of Christopher Nolan teaming up with Hugh Jackman. That's a duo I feel like could still have gas in the tank in the future, but we'll have to see. If I had to grasp for any sort of negative, I'd say that this rivalry isn't quite explored in the way I feel like it could have been if the characters were both a little bit more fleshed out. I didn't really find myself rooting for either of them because neither are particularly likable, and I guess that's part of the point of the story, but still. Overall, a fantastic film that rises far above the lower half of this list, but isn't quite great enough to go any higher. At 7, I have Memento. I think this movie sort of established Christopher Nolan as the time wizard, the guy that isn't afraid to come up with insane ways to twist story mechanics and narrative structure that shouldn't work, but then goes and spends the time and does the work within the story to justify it and make it work. Memento is the poster child for that, a complete subversion of everything conventional storytelling should be, but that's because it's made by an unconventional filmmaker. And this movie requires such extreme preparation and work because if you tell a story backwards where every scene and moment comes into play, you can't remove anything in editing, you can't add anything in or cut anything out. You have to get it exactly right the first time, and the fact that this movie did that is astounding. This is Nolan clearly developing more of his visual filmmaking style. This movie looks really good, and that's part of what makes it such an engaging watch, but the biggest factor in that is the experience you have while watching. First, you watch a scene and go, yeah, that makes sense, I think I know what's happening, and then, wait, no, I actually have no clue. Wait, yes I do, no I don't. It's like narrative whiplash in the most fun way possible, and the ending ties it all together neatly with a bow on top. Coming in at number 6, I have the most recent Nolan film, and that's The Odyssey. Even though it isn't my highest ranked movie, this is, I think, Nolan's best directing job, and I'm not really sure it's close. This will probably move up a couple spots when I rewatch it, to be honest, but as for now, after first watch, I just can't believe this movie exists. It is a 3-hour epic that transports you to another time and place where the first 90 minutes of the movie allow you to take the time to walk around and breathe in this world of ancient Greece and Ithaca and Troy, while the back half completely suffocates you within it. This really is a tale of two halves for me. You have the first half, which is slower and takes a bit to get moving, and it's really just Odysseus and his men going here and doing this, and going there and doing that. But the set pieces and characters we got introduced to along the way, like the Cyclops sequence, oh my gosh, the giant warrior sequence, oh my gosh, the invasion of Troy, oh my gosh, the men turning into pigs, I could go on for a while. And the fact that all of it was done practically is the most mind-blowing thing I've seen in a long time. You're telling me you built a 60-foot animatronic Cyclops and stuck him in a real cave? Who does that? But then the second half, once all that story set up from the first two acts starts to pay off, oh my. This film kicks into a gear and reaches a flow state that I haven't witnessed in years. It is sheer perfection. The performances are fabulous from Damon and Hathaway and Pattinson and even John Leguizamo. I really don't think that there's a single actor or actress in this film that wasn't fantastic. That being said, I had a couple issues that prevent this from literally easily taking the number 1 spot on this list, and that's that I didn't love Tom Holland. Like I just said, everybody was great, but I had really high hopes for his performance. I thought it was a chance to flex some acting muscles that he couldn't on Spider-Man, but he ended up just doing a better version of his Spider-Man performance, in my opinion. And that's not a bad thing. Like I said, he is still good. I also think there were a few visual errors in the film, like underexposed scenes and focus issues that were really odd to see, but this is just a freakishly difficult format to make a movie in, so I'm not appalled that some mistakes slipped through. Overall, this is a film that I can't believe exists, and I'm extremely grateful to have gotten to witness this in theaters. It's a memory I won't soon forget. At number 5, it's The Dark Knight Rises. Trust me, I know this is an unpopular opinion, but this movie just stands out so much in my mind. The Nolan Batman trilogy is very special to me, and even though I can understand some of the flaws that people point out with this one, I really don't think they come close to touching the generational highs that this has. I love the arc Batman goes on of having to come out of retirement, and it feels like a very natural extension of how The Dark Knight ended. And even the journey Bruce Wayne goes on here leading to his final sacrifice is so well written. Every part of this movie is really well done in my opinion. I think Bane's slow takeover of Gotham is super engaging, and even though it does have some logical flaws, I'll admit, it makes for some of the more epic action sequences in all of Nolan's filmography. I particularly love the scene where Batman shows up again, chasing Bane and the motorcycles after they robbed the stock exchange, which is another awesome scene. There are just so many memorable moments, and it makes the film stand out so much to me. The sequence of escaping the pit gives me chills, and then the ending, really just the third act in general, but specifically the race to get the bomb out over the bay, it's just also epic. Overall, it's a movie that has clear flaws, but it's the ending to one of my favorite trilogies of all time, and I think it does more than enough to cement itself as worthy of being high on this list. Coming in number 4, I've got Nolan's previous film, Oppenheimer. If The Odyssey is his best directing job, this is his best screenplay, and I don't really think it's particularly close. This is essentially 3 hours of people sitting in rooms and talking, and there are so many different characters and so many different conversations, so to make all of that feel so alive and keep it moving at such a fast pace is extremely impressive. All of those different characters allow for a collection of unbelievable performances from everyone. Obviously, you have Cillian Murphy giving what's probably a top 10 film performance of all time, but then there's Emily Blunt with the best performance of her career, and Robert Downey Jr. with the best performances of his career, and then just super memorable side roles from Casey Affleck and Matt Damon and Dane DeHaan and Jason Clarke. It's such a strong ensemble cast. The structure of this story works really well too. We spend the first act watching through Oppenheimer's growth as a student and then a teacher, and then that directly feeds into and sets up the second act where he uses his skills to develop the bomb at Los Alamos, and then that sets up the third act where he struggles to justify what he's unleashed upon the world, and that journey that the character takes is so well written, and Cillian Murphy just does it every bit of justice possible. I want to specifically highlight what I think is a top 3 scene of Nolan's catalog, and that's the Trinity test. When I saw this in IMAX and it felt like the whole movie was building to it, and then the bomb dropped and the theater went silent, I've been chasing that feeling of euphoria since. I kind of got it yesterday when I saw The Odyssey, but the Trinity test still stands out so much in my mind. And then the blast wave came and nearly knocked me out of my seat, but that's an unbelievable moment. The ending also may be Nolan's most powerful. His commentary on nuclear war and how Oppenheimer actually did destroy the world is so poignant and thoughtful. I think that's probably the highest note one of his films have ever ended on. But moving into the top 3, I have Inception. I think this is actually Nolan's most creative concept, and it's clearly a passion project for him, and that can be felt the whole time. The set pieces are unbelievable, with the city folding in on itself, and of course the hallway fight that has grown to be so iconic over the years, but the real heart and soul of this film is its cast. It can sometimes get redundant to call Leonardo DiCaprio one of the best actors alive, but he has that reputation for a reason, and it's on display completely here. Joseph Gordon-Levitt is great, Marion Cotillard is really good in her limited screen time, and of course your whole crew here just has so many awesome dynamics and are really well written as a whole. This is truly one of Nolan's best written scripts. It's not quite on the level of Oppenheimer, but from what I can tell, this is one of the first films where I look at Nolan as a writer and a director instead of just as a director. It's not like The Prestige and The Dark Knight screenplays aren't great, but this one feels like what's really going on inside Nolan's head as a filmmaker put onto the screen. Of course, you can't talk about this movie without mentioning Hans Zimmer's score. It's unbelievable that I've made it this far into the list without mentioning his name once, but he's brilliant here. And it's not just the pulsing, quick action compositions he crafts here, but also what I consider to be quite possibly the greatest piece of music ever written for film, which is Time, the ending song. And speaking of that ending, it's perfectly ambiguous, it's perfectly engaging, and it's perfectly Nolan. Just a blast of a film. Coming in second place, I have Interstellar. To be honest with you, I watched this movie as a very young teenager for the first time. It was late at night with my cousins, and I was sleepy, and as you're probably thinking right now, that is not the proper formula to witness this movie for your first watch, and you're correct, I didn't really enjoy it. I thought it was boring, and I went years thinking that I was lower on it than most people. But then a couple years ago, it re-released in IMAX for its 10th anniversary. I'm sure a lot of you watching probably went and saw it, but I decided to go just to see what I thought, and I've never been so blown away by a theatrical experience. The reason for that isn't just one thing, it's dozens, but the main thing this film has at the heart of it that some of Nolan's films lack is emotion. The central theme isn't bombs being the end of humanity or the dangers of war, but instead the importance of love. It sounds so out of place for a space adventure epic, but that really is the heart of this film, and that theme is conveyed so well by the lead performance from Matthew McConaughey. Of course, he's not the only one that's great. If I was listing every actor I thought was fantastic, then I would just read the entire cast list, but he certainly stood out to me. In my opinion, it's his strongest film performance of his career, and man, do I wish he was in more projects these days. On top of that aspect though, you have Nolan's and Hoyte van Hoytema's cinematography. The sheer scale of the space visuals are breathtaking, and to know that they're scientifically accurate as well makes it all the more immersive. Of course, Hans Zimmer's score is off the charts here. It's grown to be one of, if not the greatest original soundtrack ever written for a film, and it's certainly his magnum opus. His particular piece, No Time for Caution, plays over the docking scene in the third act, and I feel fairly comfortable at this point saying that I believe that is the greatest scene in any film I've ever watched. That's extremely high praise, and that's the kind of movie we're dealing with here. And if it sounds like this would be my number one, it probably would be. If it sounds like this should be my favorite movie ever, it probably would be. If not for my number one, which is The Dark Knight. It's only when I sat down to make this list that I realized I've never really had to explain why The Dark Knight is my favorite movie of all time. I've never had to break down what it is about it that I love so much, and I don't even know if I can, but here is just a brief version of it. First of all, the defining aspect of this movie is Heath Ledger. I can't come up with a single way to talk about his performance that hasn't already been broken down for years, but all I can say is that he is magnetic as the Joker. I think the story here is the best comic book movie story in terms of how it flows. The pacing is unbelievable, the script is tight, Zimmer's score as usual is brilliant, and at least the way I look at things, this was Nolan's breakout film into legendary status. Sure, he showed his filmmaking chops in things like The Prestige and Memento, but never at this caliber and on this scale. There are so many sequences in this film that stand out to me, but it's odd. I was asked the other day what my favorite Nolan scenes ever are, and not a single one from The Dark Knight made the list. And that confused me, so I started thinking about it, and the reason why is that I don't view this movie as a collection of scenes. I look at it as a whole. You could bring up the chase with the Batpod and the 18-wheeler, but I feel like that flows too directly into the interrogation with Batman and Joker, but I feel like that flows too directly into the race to save Rachel and Harvey. It's hard to explain, but this story is just so well written. I look at it as one complete puzzle, and it feels wrong to take pieces of that puzzle out and try to judge them on their own. This is the only movie I feel like I can say that for. It's obviously a film that holds a very special place in my heart. It is my favorite Christopher Nolan movie, and it is my favorite movie of all time. But this is just my ranking. Be sure to leave yours down in the comments below. Where do you have The Odyssey ranked? Do you have any issues or places you agree with my list? I genuinely want to hear from and talk to you all down below. If you want to help out the channel, be sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this. But with that being said, thanks so much for watching, and God bless.